How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Zayin, Daf 7 of Masechta Menachos. Friends, we are in the middle of a discussion that we began yesterday, of course. We learned first of all, friends, I'm testing out some new tech today. I have a new microphone that I'm testing out. Hopefully everything's going to go smoothly. Hopefully it's a little bit of an improvement, I hope. The other microphone was okay, but sometimes there'll be a little bit of an echo that I'm hoping it was the microphone and not the room. So I guess we'll find out. So I hope that this will be a little bit of an improvement. Friends, we are in the middle of a discussion that we began yesterday in a Mishnah, specifically the opinion of Ben Beseira. His opinion was if the Kometz, specifically in the Mishnah, he says that if the Kometz was taken with the Kohen's left hand, no big deal, put it back in the mixing bowl and just retake the Kometz with your right hand. We had seen in the Gemara that Ben Beseira actually extends that to all of the psulim that we had mentioned in the Mishnah. For example, Azar. If Azar were to take a Kometz from the mixing bowl, put it back, no big deal. Let's get a Kohen to then take it from there and take the Kometz properly and all good. We had then seen at the end of yesterday's daf the opinions of Rabbi Yossi ben Yassian and Rabbi Yehuda Anachtom, who had said that this is, right, that it can only be redone so long as the Kometz has not yet been put into a separate bowl. Meaning, you have the mixing bowl with the flour, the oil, the livona, let's say it's a minchas. So you have the mixing bowl, and then you're going to take the Kometz and take the handful and put it in a separate bowl, into the Kometz bowl, let's call it. So they say, Rabbi Yossi ben Yassian and Rabbi Yehuda Anachtom, they say that once the Kometz has been placed in the Kometz bowl, it's too late. You can't redo. So long as it hasn't yet been put into the Kometz bowl, you could put it back in the mixing bowl and let somebody kosher redo it. So it is on that their opinion that we are going to delve into today's daf. The first topic of today's daf is if the avodah of psuls counts, right? If you have Azar, who's Pasul, Bichlal, if he does avodah, does it even count or not? And what are the implications for this discussion about being able to redo, and if it messes up, doesn't mess up? So, what exactly are the ramifications to begin with of somebody who's Pasul doing the avodah? The next topic we are going to discuss is if klei require knowledge to be meqadesh, right? So for example, if the Kometz is put into a klei, does the person placing the Kometz into the klei have to be aware, have to have kavanah, knowledge that he is putting a Kometz in a klei? Or even if he is unwitting, will the klei still be meqadesh? That's the second topic of today's daf. And the third topic is if the mincha bowl can be resting on the floor, does a kohen need to be holding the mincha bowl during the time of Kometzing, during the time of putting the Kometz into the Kometz bowl, etc.? Do you need a kohen holding it? So for example, when it comes to Kabbalah Sadam, by animal sacrifice, by Kabbalah Sadam, right? Was it V'krivu b'nei Aharon HaKohanim Sadam, which we learn that's Kabbalah Sadam, and the b'nei Aharon, you need a kohen to do Kabbalah Sadam. You don't just have the blood squirt into a bowl resting on the floor. You have a kohen holding the vessel. Do you need a kohen to hold the vessel to receive the kometz, or can that vessel just be lying on the floor and you'll just place it in the bowl that's lying on the floor? That is the third topic of today's daf. Along the way, we'll get to some other topics, but I think let's stick with these three. Friends, let's jump in to Daf Zayin of Masechta Menachos. And again, I'm testing out a new microphone. Hopefully everything is going to go givaldig. Friends, we begin on Daf Vav Amid Beis, on the last of the thin lines. Maskefler of Nachman. Rav Nachman asks a question on Rav Yossi bar Asiyan and Rabbi Yehuda Hanachtom. My Savri, what do they hold? Because they made a distinction. They said if a Zar, for example, were to take a Kometz, right? So you have the mixing bowl, I'm going to call it. So you have the mixing bowl. In the mixing bowl,
let's say it's a mincha psuls, that's what we'll work with today. A mincha psuls, which means that in the mixing bowl, there's flour, there's oil, there's levona. Now, that's the mixing bowl. The Zar takes a fistful, a kometz, from the mixing bowl. So they said, look, if it's still in his hand, just put it back in the mixing bowl and you can get a call over the kohen and let him do it kosherly. However, they say, if the Zar had already taken the kometz and put it in a second bowl, in the kometz bowl, we'll call it, well, at that point, it is unfixable. So Rav Nachman wants to know, what exactly is their opinion? What do they hold in terms of my kasabe anitanoi ik mitzas psulin avodah he? If the kometz that is kometzed by these by a zar, let's say by psulin, I'll use a zar as the example. I'll use a zar. So if it's actually considered an avodah and he's pasul to do the avodah, well, you ruined it. I don't care. Put it in mixing bowl, kometz bowl, ruined. Even if he didn't put it into the kometz bowl, ruined. You took a kometz from the mixing bowl. He's a zar, not allowed to do it. Pasul, nothing to talk about it. Now, if the kometz of a psul, of a zar, is not an avodah, so then I don't care what klei you put it in. Put it in the mixing bowl, put it in the kometz bowl, do whatever you want. But it's not. He's not avodah. He's not ruining anything. There's nothing to ruin. It's not an avodah. Who cares? Even if he puts it into the kometz klei, who actually cares? Hadrama Rav Nachman then said, "L'olam avodah hi." Really, it is an avodah. It is an avodah. Okay, so why is it not ruined then? V'lo gomra avodasa de ovid lo matan klei. The thing is, the avodah is incomplete until it is placed into the kometz klei. So therefore, they hold that the avodah of azar would be considered avodah, but it has to be a complete avodah. It's only considered complete once the kometz has been taken from the mixing bowl and placed in the kometz bowl. So essentially what they're saying is that once the kometz has been placed in the kometz bowl, well then the avodah has been complete and they ruined it. So long as the kometz has not yet been placed in the kometz bowl, so then so they took the kometz from the mixing bowl, but they haven't yet placed it in the kometz bowl, so it's an incomplete avodah. So as long as it hasn't been completed, it can still be fixed. Givaldig. So my new microphone that I'm playing with is the DJI Mic 3, and it has this into this screen with the, as I'm talking, it shows the level of the mic level. So it's I'm sure I'll get used to it, but it's a little bit distracting because also since it's the first time, I'm keeping an eye on the mic levels to make sure it stays green and doesn't get orange or red. So I'm in the long term, I don't imagine it being an issue for more than one or two shiurim. But it's interesting. I'm keeping an eye. Did I hit orange? Test. All right. Let's see. Okay. The Gemara asks a very interesting question. So once the zar, so you have the mixing bowl, okay? The zar sticks his hand in, takes out a fistful, okay? Now, the Gemara wants to say, look, I don't care which klei he puts it in now. The mixing bowl is a klei sharis. The kometz bowl is a klei sharis. He took a kometz from the mixing bowl. The Gemara wants to say, who at this point it should be stuck. Either bowl he's going to put it back into is a klei sharis, and therefore it should be considered. What's the difference if he puts it into the kometz bowl or to the mixing bowl? Either way, he's taking the kometz and putting it into klei sharis. That should ruin it. If we're saying that
completing the avodah ruins it, putting the komets in either klei sharis, the Gemara wants to argue, will ruin the avodah. So who cares if he puts it in the mixing bowl or in the kometz bowl? Who is outside? Looks like my mom and my niece went out for some fun. What time is it? Oh, it's late. Okay, fine. Now, where were we? So, even when he puts it back in the mixing bowl, we should still consider that to be putting it into a klei sharis, and it should be Pasul for doing that. So says Rabbi Yochanan, well, here's the thing. What happened? The Tsar took the komets from the mixing bowl, and the people said, Tsar, what are you doing? What are you doing? And he says, oops, and he puts it back into the mixing bowl. Why is he putting it back into the mixing bowl? Because he's saying, the idea is that he doesn't want to be taking the komets. He realizes, like, wait, this is a problem. He wants to undo the problem, so therefore he's putting it back in the mixing bowl. Obviously, oh, yeah, you see, that's getting orange. Yeah, okay, so I probably want to avoid the orange. Red means that that's going to clip, so I'm going to have to, I guess, probably just lower the, okay, what's it called? Preamp or something? Something on the camera, but I'll do that later. I don't think it's going to clip. Anyways, it's interesting to be able to see that. So where were we? So basically, the Tsar realized, like, oh no, so he wants to undo what he did, so he's putting it back in the mixing bowl. Because he wants to undo what he did. So therefore, he obviously is not putting it into the mixing bowl with intention. And we're saying that when he puts it back in the mixing bowl, it's kosher. So therefore, Rabbi Yochanan wants to say that it's only going to be Pasul, right? So we asked the question of who cares which bowl he puts it back into. He puts it into because either way it's a klei sharis, so he should be chayav for putting the komets into klei sharis. To which we say, well, the thing is not having intention. He's realizing, oops, I messed up, so he's undoing it. He's trying to undo it, so he's not having any intention to be komets the komets, and therefore it's kosher. So Rabbi Yochanan says we can conclude from here that a klei sharis is only meqadesh when there is intention to be meqadesh, but with no intention, it's not meqadesh. Okay, so again, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Zosomeris, it says klei sharis ein mekadeshin ela midas, that a klei sharis is only going to be meqadesh when there is das, when there is intention. Hamidas mikadeshin. So now the Gemara says, wait a second. So you're telling me that Rabbi Yochanan's opinion is that if there is intention to be mekadesh, then the klei sharis is in fact mekadesh. But Rish Lakish asked this exact question to Rabbi Yochanan. Klei sharis ma'u sheikatsu psul nechatchil likar. Rish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan, and he says that if you put Pasul stuff in a klei sharis, for example, a Tsar took a kometz and puts it in a klei sharis, will the klei sharis be meqadesh, this Pasul stuff, so that it can now go on the mizbeach? And Rabbi Yochanan says, no, it's not meqadesh. So apparently, even if there is intention, sounds like regardless of intention, the klei sharis will not be meqadesh. So why did Rabbi Yochanan say that klei sharis is not meqadesh ela midas? You need das, implying that, okay, so if there is das, then it is meqadesh. But Rish Lakish had asked Rabbi Yochanan this exact question. He said, no, it's not meqadesh. Skip the next two words. Ein mekadeshin li karev. Yeah, the klei sharis won't be meqadesh to the extent that now you can offer this in the mizbeach. Keilu, you won't be able to take. Right, if a Tsar takes a kometz and puts it in a klei sharis, you won't be able to put it on the mizbeach, but it will be Pasul. It'll be meqadesh, right? It won't be meqadesh to be able to be offered of a mekadeshin Pasul, but it will be meqadesh to say, like, the Minchas Pasul, you can't offer it to that extent, right? So therefore, what Rabbi Yochanan is saying is that, so you have this Tsar, the Tsar took the kometz, and we say, wait, what are you doing? So he puts it back. without any intention to be meqadesh the kometz. So since there's no intention, the klei is not meqadesh. We just get a kohen to come over and fix it and to do it properly. If there was das, so then the kohen wouldn't be able to fix it by taking the kometz himself. If he intentionally, if the zar had intentionally put the kometz in a klei with the intention of being meqadesh the kometz, well then it's unfixable. So it'll be meqadesh the kometz to the extent that the korban's ruined. It will not be meqadesh the kometz to the extent that now it can be offered in the mizbech. No, it can't. But so long as there is das, the klei will be meqadesh at least to the extent that the korban will be ruined. Rav Amram says, Rav Amram, you can even say that the klei is meqadesh shelo lidas. Rav Amram argues on Rabbi Yochanan. He says that even without das, even without intention, i.e., when the zar says, oops, what did I do? And he puts the kometz back without any intention to be meqadesh the kometz, but just he says, oops, what did I do? And he puts it back. Rabbi Amma says, in principle, that would also be meqadesh it, and it would be unfixable. However, what's going on in this case? Rabbi Omar kigon she'echziru libisa gedusha. Here we're talking about where the zar put the kometz back into a mixing bowl that was heapingly full. What does that mean? So I have a slide over here. I have a slide that I took off of the internet from the website called Unsplashed. A slide with a bowl that is overly filled, in this case with eggshells. Now, eggshells are not kosher for a korban mincha, but they do work to explain that if we could use our imagination to replace all those eggshells with flour, and you have this heap you have this big heap of flour that's going above the bowl, right? The rim of the bowl is way below the peak of the eggshells. So imagine those eggshells were filled with flowers, and you have a nice big peak and over a heap of flour going above and beyond the rim of the lip of the bowl. And then we're saying that the zar, so in principle, if the zar puts the kometz back into the bowl, so the klei, the bowl, will be meqadesh the kometz, and the korban will be ruined. But because we're talking about a heaped bowl, so when he puts the kometz back, he's not putting it in the bowl, he's putting it on the top of the heap, which is way above the lip of the bowl. So for that reason, the korban remains kosher. So again, Rav Amram says, Rav Amram, even though in principle a kometz, a klei is meqadesh even without intention, however, the kometz was returned into a mixing bowl that was heaped. But if we're talking about a heaped bowl, well then how did he take the kometz in the first place? Right? If we're talking about a heaped bowl, well then the kometz was taken from not inside of the bowl, but from the top of the heap. But you need to take the kometz from within the bowl. So how can we talking about a heaped bowl like that? Okay, so rather what it means is I have another slide over here with a filled bowl. This bowl is filled with some kind of a salad. Also not flour, but it's a filled bowl. Imagine that instead of salad, that was flour. So says of Amram, okay, what it's talking about is that when he put the kometz back, he put it back onto a bowl that was just perfectly filled. Any less, and it would be not completely filled. Any more, and it would be heaped. Just a perfect, flat, fully filled, perfectly flat bowl. And therefore, when he puts the kometz back, he's going to be putting it on top of the flat bowl, and that will be above the lip of the bowl. Right? Imagine you take that perfectly filled bowl and you take a kometz and you put it on top of it. It's going to be above the lip of the bowl because it's already completely filled. So the bisa tfufa is a flat, completely filled mixing bowl.
Yeah, but if we're talking about, so clearly then the kometz was also taken from this bowl, right? Which means that you have to imagine then that he stuck his hand into the middle of the bowl and took out a fistful, which means that there's actually now going to be a hole in the middle of the bowl where he took the kometz. And therefore, when he puts it back in, he's going to be putting it back into that hole. In which case, he's going to be putting it into the bowl, and he should be chayiv for that, because Rav Amram is saying even without intention, the klei would be meqadesh, right? And therefore, right? Well, not I said chayiv, but I mean the mincha should be pasul. So since he's taking the kometz from the middle of the bowl, avodah le guma, it's going to make a hole in that beautiful flour. So kimahader legave demana. And therefore, when he puts the kometz, when he says oops, and he puts the kometz back into the hole that he made, that hole is going into the klei, and he should the kometz and the korban should be pasul. So mechimahader le adafna demana umanin le v'nofel memele denaisek mishachziru akof. You heard that? Basically what he's doing is, if you can imagine, if you look at this filled bowl, and you can imagine sticking your hand into the middle of it and taking out a fistful. And what he does is when he puts it back, he doesn't put it back into the hole that he made, because that would be going into the bowl. But he puts it back on the side of the bowl. You'll have a hole in the middle, but the side is still untouched and flat. And if he puts the fistful back on the flat area, so he's not putting it back in the bowl, he's putting it back above the rim of the bowl, on top of the flour that's flat on the sides. And then he gives a little shake to the bowl, and the flour then on its own makes its way back into the hole, but he's not the one putting it back into the hole, and therefore the klei will not be meqadesh. Again, so mechimahader, when he puts back the kometz, mehadle adafno dimona, he puts it back on the sides of the vessel, the sides of the hole, where it's still flat, and he'd be putting it above the lip of the vessel. Umanidle, and then he shakes her and gives a little shake to the vessel. V'nafel memele, and then the flour falls in to then fill the hole that was made before. Denaisa k'mishach zirakof, and now it's as if a monkey had put it back into the hole, not that he had put it in the hole. Okay, fine, givaldik. So we have seen so far a machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Amram. Rabbi Yochanan says that in order for a klei sharis to be meqadesh to the extent that the korban will be ruined, Rabbi Yochanan says, he would have to have intention. Because he's putting it back into a vessel without intention, right? He's hoping to fix the problem that he made, not to be meqadesh the kometz. So Rabbi Yochanan says, since there's no intention, the mincha is not ruined. Whereas Rav Amram says, no, in principle, even without intention, the mincha is ruined. But over here, he wasn't putting the kometz back into the vessel. He was kind of putting it on to the side of the vessel and shaking it into the vessel, but he wasn't putting it directly into the vessel, and that is why it is not ruined. And now the Gemara suggests a third solution to this question, which brings us into the third topic of today's daf, which is if the mincha bowl can be resting on the floor. Let's see. So, Omar le Reb Yirmiyah le Reb Zer. So it says Reb Yirmiyah to Reb Zer. V'lukma kigon shechziru l'chli amunach agabe karka. Why don't we say this? The reason why the Tsar could simply return the kometz is because the kometz is resting on the floor. But it's because the bowl, the mixing bowl, is resting on the floor. The kometz was taken from the bowl that was resting on the floor, is returned to a bowl that's resting on the floor. And because the bowl is resting on the floor, it doesn't count. Because you need a kohen holding the bowl. Elishmamina, from the fact that we don't suggest that, so it teaches, we learn, Kometzing miklish agabe akarka. Clearly then, since that's not a solution, that means that it's actually a possibility to take a kometz from a vessel that's on
the ground. And therefore, when he returns it, if we're concerned about, hey, when he returns it to the vessel, won't that Pasul the mincha? So to say that the vessel's on the ground isn't going to help anything, because you can take a kometz from a vessel that is on the ground. Omarle. So Reb Zera responds to Reb Yirmiyah, Konagaito bebeoya de iboyalon. You touched on a topic that we had been discussing to Avimi Tani Menachos be'Rav Chizda, because Avimi was learning Menachos by Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda was teaching Avimi Menachos. Avimi be'Rav Chizda Tani, to which the Gemara stops for a second and says, wait a second. That doesn't make sense. Rav Chizda was teaching Avimi. Avimi was Rav Chizda's teacher. V'amar Rav Chizda, kulfei tave baloe me'avimi aloda shmaita. Oh boy, did I experience whacking from my Rebbe Avimi on the following sugya chevra. It's interesting. I learned this Mishnah yesterday. On Shabbos, I was learning Mishnayos, Arochin, Mishnah Yomi, and I mamish learned this Mishnah yesterday in Arochin. For lahachriz v'tzufin lamed yom, it's a Mishnah in Arochin that says that if we need to sell property of yisomim, of orphans, in order to pay back a debt that their father owed, so when selling a field from that belongs to orphans, we want to get the highest possible price, the highest possible bid. So the Mishnah in Arochin says that for 30 days, we announce that we have this field that we'll be selling, so that we maximize, right? So that over the course of 30 days, as many people as possible will be made aware of the impending sale, so that we can get a whole bunch of bidders and get top dollar. And the Gemara says either we can do balahachriz ritzufin if you want to do 30 days in a row, so you do it for 30 days. Another option is if you want to extend it to even 60 days, so sheni v'chamishi samech yom. So you can also have the option to announce it twice a week, not every day, but on Monday and Thursday over the course of 60 days, and then over a longer period of time, also more people will know that this sale is happening. Okay, beseder. It's a sugya in Arochin. But it says of Chizda that, oh boy, did I experience blows from Avimi while learning that sugya. So Avimi was Rav Chizda's sugya, was Rav Chizda's Rebbe. Rav Chizda was not Avimi's Rebbe. If I was Avimi, I would have been nervous when the tables turned. I'll go upon him. Avimi Masechta is Akra. Well, what happened was Avimi Taka forgot Masechta Menachos. Is Akra. He forgot his learning on Masechta Menachos. V'also kamid Rav Chizda le'adkure. So he went to Rav Chizda, so Rav Chizda can remind him about Masechta Menachos. Le'adkure gemari v'lishlach lei v'leisi legabe. But still, I mean, if Avimi was Rav Chizda's Rebbe, so still, why is Avimi going to Rav Chizda? Even if he forgot Masechta Menachos, he should have had Rav Chizda come to him to remind him Masechta Menachos. So, well, as Rashi points out, as we learned in the Gemara in Masechta Megillah, Yagaiti umatzaiti taimen, that if a person says, I put in a lot of effort and I succeeded, believe him. Therefore, Avimi, because he wanted to succeed in learning Masechta Menachos, he wanted to put in the extra effort, go the extra mile. So therefore, he went to Rav Chizda. Anyways, while Avimi was learning Masechta Menachos, Paga bei Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman bumped into Avimi. Omerlei Ketzad Kometzing. And Rav Nachman says to Avimi, "Nu, so how do you take a kometz?" Avimi pointed to a vessel that was lying on the floor. And Avimi says, well, you stick your hand into this vessel that's full of flour and oil,
and you take out a kometz. Rav Nachman says, wait a second, but can you simply just take a fistful from a vessel that's resting on the floor without that a kohen doesn't a kohen need to be holding it? So Avimi says, oh yeah, well, a kohen would be holding the vessel when another kohen takes a fistful from it. Oh boy, those volume levels are getting up there. I don't think I've clipped yet. Chevre, if I'm clipping, I apologize. It'll be fixed by tomorrow. I think that this mic comes actually with a backup recording that's a little bit less strong, so maybe I can figure out how to use that, but hopefully it's not clipping. Test, hey, ha. I can't. It has to be while I'm actually talking and getting into it. Anyways, fine. So okay. So Avimi says that in order for the kohen to take the kometz from the mixing bowl, a kohen would have to be holding the mixing bowl. Okay, fine. Okay, so now it says here, Ketzah Mekachnis HaMenachos, change Menachos to Kometz. So Ketzah Mekachnis at Kometz. So now Rav Nachman asks Avimi, and so now after the kohen takes the kometz from the mixing bowl, what does he do with it? So Amalei Nosna the klei. So Avimi says he puts it in this vessel, and he points to a vessel lying on the floor. To which Rav Nachman says, but that vessel's on the floor. Can you put the kometz into a vessel that's on the floor? Amalei demadba lei kohen. So Avimi says, well, I'm saying that a kohen were to pick it up. So basically, you have a kohen who is holding the mixing bowl so you have one kohen holding the mixing bowl, and you have another kohen holding the kometz bowl. So to which Rav Nachman says, okay, so you're saying that we need 3 kohanim, right? You have one kohanim who's doing the taking the fistful from the mixing bowl, putting it into the kometz bowl. You have another kohen who's holding the mixing bowl, and you have a third kohen who's holding the kometz bowl, right? Because as Rashi points out, and as we learned in our Mishnah, we were reminded about in our Mishnah yesterday, in the Beis HaMikdash, all the avodah has to be done with your right hand. You can't use your left hand. So it's not like you can have one kohen who's holding both vessels, one in his right hand, one in his left hand. You can't do that because you can't use your left hand. You have to use your right hand. So you have to have one kohen holding the mixing bowl, another kohen holding the kometz bowl, and a third kohen who's doing the kometzing and all that kind of stuff. So to which Avimi says, so what? Big deal. As we learned about in the Mishnayos in Masechta Yoma, we had 13 Kehanim offering the Korban Tamid. So what? So 3 Kehanim, what's the big deal? Not that much. Eser, Rav Nachman asks Avimi, Ze aklal kol hakometz v'nosein b'chli, that anyone who takes the kometz and puts it in a vessel, hamolech, and brings it to the mizbeach ve'amaktir, and offers it and burns it on the fire. Lechol davar shedarku lechol v'chulei. We're talking about pigul. Okay, if he has it with machshavas chutz imkonu chutz zmanu, v'lemagbio lo katani. But it doesn't say there anything about anybody picking up the klisharis, picking up the vessel, right? The kometz bowl. Tana say the avodas nakav v'lo say the kanim. To which Avimi says, yeah, so what? That's like a Facebook meta kind of detail. Okay, we're focusing on the avodas, right? We know, of course, by animal sacrifice, there's shchita, kabbalah, olacha, zrika. By kometz, there's the kometz, there's the nesina b'klei, olacha to the mizbeach, aktara, burning on the mizbeach. We're focusing on the avodas that need to happen, not on sort of these Facebook meta kind of things about how many kohanim you need, and you need this kohen to be holding this and that kohen to be holding that. We're focusing on kind of the core elements over here, not the Facebook meta elements. But many made Rav Sheshes. They asked Rav Sheshes, can you
can the kohen take the kometz from a mixing bowl that is resting on the ground, or do you need a kohen to be holding that mixing bowl? Pokchazi mai avdin lego. To which Rav Sheshes says, mai avdin legov, I guess. Rav Sheshes says, well, let's see what they do in the heichel. When it comes to the shulchan, friends, the shulchan in the heichel that had the showbreads on it. So the showbreads, right? So you have the shulchan. There are 2 stacks of showbreads on the shulchan in the heichel. They would be there all week, and then every Shabbos they would switch them out and eat them. Now the showbreads, the 2 stacks of 6 showbreads each, so 12 showbreads total. And on top of each stack there would be a bozich, a ladle of sorts that was filled with frankincense. So you have the table, and on the table are the breads, and on top of the stacks of breads are frankincense. Every Shabbos, when it was time to eat the showbreads, they would first take the frankincense, remove it from the table, and that was ke'ilu, like the kometz being removed from the mincha. Right? You have all the flour, you take the kometz, you remove it from the flour, you burn the flour on the mizbeach, and now the rest of the flour goes to the kohanim. So similarly with the showbreads, they would take the frankincense, remove it from the shulchan, take it to the mizbeach chitzon, burn the frankincense on the mizbeach chitzon, and now the showbreads can be eaten by the kohanim. Now the mizbeach, the shulchan, this whole time, nobody's picking up the shulchan; it's resting on the floor. Again, see what they do in the heichel. You'd have 4 priests going to the heichel. 2 of them, you'd have one of them holding 6 loaves, another one holding another 6 loaves, another one with 1 frankincense ladle, and a 4th with another frankincense ladle. So you'd have 4 kohanim, and between them they would have all of the showbreads and all of the frankincense. And 4 would precede those 4. Shnaim litol shnei sidarim. 2 of them to remove the 12 showbreads. Uveiz litol beis bazichin. And another 2 to remove the ladle, the frankincense ladles. It doesn't say anything about lifting up the table. It doesn't say, and we have another kohen or 2 to lift up the table. It doesn't say that. So Elamai, the shulchan, which is the vessel, is resting on the floor when they remove the frankincense, which is ke'ilu, removing the kometz, the equivalent of removing the kometz. So Lav Omar Tosom, Seder Avodas Nokat, Ochinami Seder Avodas Nokat. To which they pushed back at Rav Sheshes and they said, wait, but we said, just like we said earlier, that we're not focused on the Kohanim, we're focused on the avodas. So we'll say the same thing here. But midami, it's not similar to earlier. Hasam lo nochis liminyan de Kohanim. Over there, it literally was not talking about the Kohanim at all. It was saying, so it was focusing on the kometz, on the nesina b'kliya, and the olach al mizbeach, and the aktar. That's what it was focusing on. Over here, we literally are talking about the Kohanim. 4 kohanim, 2 of them are doing this, 2 of them are doing that. If you had to lift up the shulchan, we would have said, and we also have kohanim to lift up the shulchan, but we didn't say that because it doesn't exist. So here it is talking about the different kohanim and what they're doing. In Isa, if it was true that, right, if it was so that the shulchan needed to be lifted up, less than magbiyah, so it should say, and there were kohanim to lift up the shulchan, but the Mishnah doesn't say that. So we see that the frankincense was removed from the shulchan that was resting on the ground, and therefore also when it comes to menachos, the kometz can be removed from a mixing bowl that is resting on the ground. Omar Ravin, says Ravin, pshitali, it's obvious to me. Komsin mikli shal gabe karka. It's obvious to me that the kometz can be taken from a vessel that is resting on the ground, as we just explored about the removing of the frankincense from the shulchan.
The shulchan was resting on the floor, the frankincense was removed. No problem. Mikadshin mincha b'klei she'al gabe karka. Additionally, when an offerer of a mincha comes to the Beis HaMikdash with his flour, that flour can be dumped into a vessel that is also resting on the floor. That same Mishnah that we just learned a minute ago about the lechem aponim, the showbreads, it said that you have the Kohanim coming in with the showbreads, and we don't see anything about picking up the shulchan when they would put the showbreads on the shulchan. They would put the showbreads on the shulchan when it was resting on the floor. The shulchan was resting on the floor. So also in terms of the person who's offering a mincha, comes with his flour, he could dump it into a mixing bowl that is on the floor. Okay. But Rava asks, Kiddush kometz mai. What about after the kohen takes the kometz from the mixing bowl and he needs to deposit it in the kometz bowl? Can the kometz bowl be resting on the floor? Or does the kohen need to be holding the kometz bowl when the kometz is deposited in it? Just like when it comes to an animal sacrifice, right? The Pasul says, V'krivu b'nei Aaron ha'kayanim es Adam. And V'krivu, as we learned about Masechta Zvachim, means Kabbalas Adam, i.e. the b'nei Aaron, the kayanim, need to receive the blood of the animal, i.e. they're holding the vessel. So do we say that just like by the animal sacrifice, the Kohanim are holding the vessel during Kabbalas Adam? So here also we need a kohen to hold the vessel when the kometz is deposited in it. The nesina b'klei. So by Rava asks, Kiddush kometz mai, when the kohen places the kometz in the kometz vessel, do you need a kohen to hold that vessel? Mincha yalfinana. Do we learn it out from the mincha, which we just said a minute ago, that when the offerer of the korban comes to the Beis HaMikdash with his flour, he can deposit it in a vessel that is lying on the floor. So maybe the nesina b'klei of the kometz can also be lying on the floor. Or do we learn it out from animal sacrifice, where Kabbalas Adam needs to be in a vessel being held by a kohen? The pashta midam yalfinan. Rava then answered his question by saying, we learn it from Kabbalas Adam that a kohen must hold the vessel. Does Rav really say this? That we learn it out from Kabbalas Adam? Itmar kometz shechilko b'shnei kelim. What happens if you have the kometz and you put half of it in one vessel and half of it in another vessel? Rav Nachman Amar Eino Kadosh. Rav Nachman says Pasul. Well, it's not Kadosh. Rav Amar Kadosh. Rav says it's fine. It's Kadosh, even though the kometz was divided into two vessels. Now, if it's so that Rava learns from Kabbalas Adam, Leilef Midam, well then we should learn from Kabbalas Adam, if half of the blood is in, where half a shear of blood is in this vessel and half a shear of blood is in the other vessel, it's Pasul. Doesn't work. So if Rava in fact learns from blood, so then if half of the kometz was in one vessel and half of the kometz was in the other vessel, it should be not kadosh like Rav Nachman says. Hadar Bei Rav Me'ahi, you're right. Rava Taka changed his mind to hold like Rav Nachman that it would not be kadosh in two vessels. Vidam minolin dilo kadosh lachatzayin. Now we just said that if we compare the kometz to the Kabbalas Adam, then it must be that two vessels is no good. How do we know that by blood two vessels is no good? Titani Rav Tachlifa ben Shaul. Tachlifa ben Shaul taught Kidesh pachas mikdei azaya b'chlizeh ufachas mikdei azaya b'chlizeh. This is talking about mei chatos mei efer para aduma. That when they are making mei chatos to sprinkle on somebody who's tmei mace, if less than enough mechatos was in this vessel and less than enough was in that vessel, they can't be later joined. Again, the Tanur of Tachlif ben Shaul, Kidesh pachas m'kidei azay b'chlizeh, if less than the necessary amount of mechatos was made in this vessel, and less than the necessary amount in another vessel, lo kidesh, they are not holy. They asked, b'dam mai, and what about by kabbalah sadam? Right, let's say you have a chatos apnimios and you have to do azos inside the azara, inside the heichel, and you didn't receive enough blood to be able to do all of the azos. So do we say, well, maybe para aduma is alachal Moshe Misinai, and therefore we can't learn out anything from it. It's unique. Or maybe the reason by para aduma is because it says v'tovo b'moyim, that you stick the hyssop into water and then you sprinkle it. It has to be enough water, ha-moyim, the water that has a full shear milichatchila. So it says that he'll stick his finger by the Parkoin Mashiach. It says that he'll stick his finger into the blood. Badam, the blood that has a full shear. The Itmayan was stated. Amr Bzrika, Amr Balazar, Badam lo kidesh. That. Where am I? Fine. So Vidma Amr Bzika Amr Elazar Apadam Lo Kidesh, that the same thing would apply to the blood, that if there was less than a shear of blood, it would be Pasul. Just like when there's less than a shear of the meqadesh, it's Pasul. Also when there's less of a shear of blood, it's Pasul. Rava says, we also in a price like this, V'toval, that when the Pasuk says by Paikar Mashiach V'toval, and he will dip V'lo Maspeg, Misapeg, he doesn't wipe off his fingers on the vessel. Badam shir tvila meikaru, that milichatchila there has to be enough blood. Min adam sheba inyan, from the blood in the Indian. We're going to have to explain in a minute what that means. Ve'estrich lemichtav v'toval, ve'estrich lemichtav badam. The pasuk by Parker and Mashiach needed to say v'toval, from which we said that he can't wipe it off on the vessel. Let me just check. Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay, fine. Now, right, misapeg is to wipe off, like to clean off his finger on the side of the vessel. Okay, now, so we needed to say, where am I? We needed to say v'tava, we need to say badam. Because of Achmana, v'tava, if we'd only say that he has to dip his finger into the blood, avamina, avagabdilo, kibel shir tvilos. So if we only said v'tava, and we said that means that he can't wipe off the blood on the side of the vessel. But I wouldn't know that you also need a full amount of blood from the beginning. From the time of the Kabbalah Saddam, you need enough blood to do all the hazos. So because of Achmana Badam, therefore it says Badam to say you need the full amount, milichatchila. Because of Achmana Badam, and if it says Badam, but it didn't say V'toval, Havamina afilu misapik, I would think that you can even wipe off your fingers on the side of the vessel. So because of Achmana V'toval, therefore it says V'toval, no, you can't do that either. Min Adam Sheba'inyan Lim'ute Mai, what's that talking about? Amar Rava Lim'ute Shirayim Shebe'etzba. It's teaching that if you stick your finger into the blood and you sprinkle towards the paroches and the heichel, and now there's still some more blood still on there's leftover blood still on your finger. Maybe you can reuse that and give another sprinkle. No, you can't. And this supports Rabbi Eliezer, who says that the leftover blood is in fact Pasul. Ravin, by Rav Ada l'Rava, says Rav Ada to Rava, Amrei Talmidach, Amr Ravamim, your student said in the name of Ravamim Tanya that we learned in the Brayso, Ayamazeh, if a kohen was sprinkling the blood, v'nitza azoya miyado, and the blood splattered from his hands, right? Remember the sugi that we learned probably about a month ago of kibus begadim. That was an exciting sugya by Korban Chatos. Kibus begadim. That if the blood of the Korban Chatos gets on your clothing, you have to. There's a mitzvah's essay to remove it from the clothing, to wash it out, to clean it from the clothing. So if a person was sprinkling the blood, v'nitza azah miyado, and it got on his clothing, If prior to the azah, the blood got on his clothing, ton kibus. You have the mitzvah of kibus begadim, washing your clothing. Mishahiza, but once already he's sprinkled, ain ta'un kibus. We don't require kibus begadim anymore. My love, achelo gomer azah also. Umisha gomer azah also. So what we want to say is what that means is that if the blood got on his clothing before the completion of all of the hazos of the blood, i.e., if you stick your finger into the blood and give one sprinkle, and then you still have 6 sprinkles to go, and some of the blood gets on your clothes even before you re-dipped your finger into the blood, you would have to wash your clothes, even though that's the leftovers from the first sprinkle. And what we're saying is that once you're all done, i.e., once you're all done, so then already at that point, if it gets on your clothes, you don't need to wash your clothes. But in the meantime, during the interim, while you're sprinkling the 7 sprinkles, if at any point the blood gets on your clothing, you have the mitzvah assay of kibus begadim. So we see that the blood on the leftover blood on your fingers is kosher for azaz, and that's why if it gets on your clothes, you have to wash your clothing. No, what it means, no. It means that if you dip your finger into the blood, and some of that blood gets on the kohen's clothing, so then there's mitzvah of kibus begadim. But once he gives a sprinkle, whatever's left over on his finger, and whatever's left over his finger gets on his clothing, ain't ton kibus, that would not require kibus begadim, because the leftover blood is not actually considered usable. Abaye asks a question. This is related to the para aduma. That when they were slaughtering the para aduma, so the assumption here is that the para aduma was slaughtered in a different place where it was burned. I'm sorry. That they would slaughter the para aduma, and then the there's a part of the process of slaughtering, preparing and burning the paraduma is that the blood would be sprinkled towards the direction of the heichel. And the assumption is that sprinkling was happening in a different place than where the animal was and where it was going to be burnt. So now Amar Abaye Gomer Milahazos, that once the kohen is done sprinkling towards the heichel, well then he goes to the location where the cow is, and he cleans his hand after he's done with all the sprinkling on the body of the cow. Gomer in, lo gomer lo. We're saying that he's only cleaning his hand at the end after he's done with all the 7 sprinkles, which means that everything in the middle, even the shirayim in between, was kosher. So Amarle says Rava, no. Gomer kaneach yodo. When he's done with all the sprinkles, he cleans his whole hand by the cow. Lo gomer mekaneach etzba'o. But when he's not done with all the sprinkles, he just cleans his finger, not his whole hand. Okay, but I understand what it means is that at the end, he will go to where the cow is and clean his hand after he's done with all the sprinkles. That he goes to where the cow is in order to burn it. So when he goes there, he'll clean his hand. But if we're saying that after each dipping he's going to be cleaning his finger, what's he cleaning it on? He's clearly not going back to the cow. He's not going to give one sprinkle, go back to the cow, clean his finger, go back to where he's sprinkling, do a second sprinkle. Come on, it's not practical. So Rabbi B'sfas Mizrak. Rabbi answers for Rava, seemingly, that he'll for the in-between ones for his finger, he'll just clean it off on the side of the vessel. At the end, he then goes to where the cow is lying there and cleans his whole hand. Okay. All of that was ultimately to make the point that we learn out the mincha from the placing of the kometz in the kometz bowl is learned out from the Kabbalah Saddam, from the shchita of an animal, and therefore, says Rave, a kohen would have to be holding the vessel that the kometz is being put into. Friends, that was Daf Zayin, Daf 7 of Masechta Menachos. On Daf 7 of Masechta Menachos, we experimented with a new microphone. I hope that it was okay and that there's no clipped audio or anything like that. We also learned about if the avodah of psuls counts, and we said, yes, it does, as long as it is a complete avodah, which is why if the zar, let's say, only took the kometz but didn't put it in the kometz vessel, it could be salvageable, to which the Gemara said, but wait, why should it be salvageable? Even if he puts it back into the mixing bowl, isn't he essentially putting it in a klei sharis? So we gave a few answers to that. Rabbi Yochanan had said, well, we got into the question of if klei sharis requires knowledge to be meqadesh. So Rabbi Yochanan says, well, in order for the klei sharis to be meqadesh, you would have to have intention to be meqadesh the kometz. And since he's putting it back into the mixing bowl without such intention, the mincha remains kosher, and just bring over a kohen to fix it. Rav Am says, no, you don't necessarily need kavana. And in principle, when the zar puts it back even back in the mixing bowl, it would be the mincha would be pasul. However, we said that it was talking about a situation where it was completely flat, and he took out the kometz and put it on the side and shaked it back. Okay. And then we got into the whole question of if the mincha bowl can be resting on the floor, because we suggested that, well, maybe a solution could have been that the mincha bowl was resting on the ground, which is why he would be potter, but we didn't, or which is why the mincha would remain kosher, but we didn't say that, implying that the kometz needs, that the bowl that the kometz is received in needs to be held. So we got into the question of if the mincha bowl could be resting on the floor. We said when placing the flour in the mixing bowl, Rava learns from the shulchan that yes, it can be resting on the floor. When kometzing from the mixing bowl, Avimi had said no, it can't be resting on the floor. Yeah, you need a kohen picking it up. Whereas Rava and Rav Sheshes say that when kometzing, it can be resting on the floor, just like the shulchan was on the floor when the bazichin were removed from it. And when placing the kometz in a vessel, so Avimi had said that it cannot be on the floor, and Rava agrees that it cannot be on the floor, because we learn out from blood that you need a kohen to be holding that vessel. Friends, that was Daf 7, Daf Zayin of Masechta Menachos. Hope you enjoyed. Cheers.